The air inside the studio was electric. A row of cameras whirred softly as their red recording lights blinked to life. The giant Access Hollywood logo glowed behind a sleek glass desk, casting gold reflections over the polished floor. Studio crew members rushed around with headsets and cue cards, whispering last-minute notes. 100 eager audience members filled the seats, buzzing with excitement, some clutching their phones to capture even a glimpse of what promised to be one of the most high-profile interviews of the week. The energy wasn't just about Hollywood glitz, it was about him. Keanu Reeves, the man who'd somehow become both an action icon and a quiet symbol of humility, was minutes away from stepping onto the stage. Behind the scenes, Mario Lopez adjusted his earpiece, glancing at himself in the monitor. His charm was legendary, charisma polished to perfection after years on camera. But beneath that easy smile was a producer's whisper feeding through his earpiece. "Make it lively, Mario. Stir things up a little. The audience loves a good reaction." Mario smirked, tugged his blazer into place, and nodded. He knew what they meant. In an industry obsessed with viral clips, a little friction made magic. And if anyone could handle it gracefully, it was Keanu Reeves. At least, that's what Mario told himself. As the countdown began, asterisk 5, 4, 3. Asterisk, the studio lights dimmed slightly before flooding the stage in warm amber hues. The announcer's voice boomed. Asterisk, please welcome the one and only Keanu Reeves. Asterisk, the crowd erupted in cheers. The curtain parted, and Keanu stepped out slowly, dressed in a simple dark suit and black shirt. His presence wasn't loud or flashy. It was calm, magnetic, and effortlessly commanding. He gave a polite wave to the audience, his smile small but genuine, his posture relaxed. He wasn't acting. He didn't need to. Keanu had the kind of aura that made people quiet their minds without knowing why. Mario greeted him with a practiced grin, shaking his hand firmly before gesturing toward the plush chair across from his. "Man, it's so good to have you here, Keanu. You've been keeping busy, huh?" he said, voice sharp and upbeat. Keanu nodded lightly, the corners of his mouth curving up. "Yeah, I've been fortunate," he replied in that familiar soft-spoken tone, measured, thoughtful, every word chosen with quiet care. The audience leaned forward. Every time Keanu spoke, it was like the noise of the world faded for a moment. The opening minutes were light, almost playful. Mario asked about the upcoming film, how Keanu prepared for another round of stunts, what motivated him after all these years. Keanu, ever humble, credited his team, the stunt coordinators, even the craft services crew. "You know," he said with a small laugh, "movies aren't made by one person. It's all of us together." The crowd applauded softly, clearly warmed by his sincerity. Mario nodded, smiling, but something in his expression shifted, an almost imperceptible narrowing of the eyes, a flicker of competitiveness. It was the look of a host who knew he was losing the spotlight to the very guest he was supposed to control. So, he leaned in. "You've had such an interesting career, Keanu," Mario began, his tone suddenly laced with something playful yet pointed. "But I've got to ask. Some people say you've been playing the same kind of guy for decades. The stoic hero, the quiet loner. Do you ever worry people get bored seeing the same Keanu over and over?" His smile was tight. The words were meant to sound casual, but everyone in the room heard the edge beneath them. The audience laughed nervously, unsure if it was a joke or a jab. The cameraman instinctively zoomed in on Keanu's face, waiting for a reaction. For a heartbeat, silence filled the space. Keanu didn't flinch. His hands rested loosely in his lap, his gaze soft but unwavering. There was no defensive smirk, no flash of irritation, just calm observation, as if he were watching the question drift through the air and deciding what to do with it. The air felt heavier, charged, like the moment before a storm or the instant between breaths. Mario shifted slightly, realizing perhaps too late that he might have crossed a line. But Keanu, ever composed, simply smiled. It wasn't the smile of someone amused, nor the forced grin of someone playing along. It was something deeper, understanding, patient, almost kind. He leaned slightly toward Mario and said, in that voice that carried more truth than volume, "You know, maybe that's not such a bad thing. The world changes fast. Sometimes it's good when something stays the same, especially if it reminds people of what still matters." His words hung in the air, rippling through the silence. Mario blinked. The audience didn't clap or laugh. They just listened. And in that instant, something shifted, not just in the room but in the mood itself. What was meant to embarrass became something unexpectedly profound. The director behind the glass gestured wildly for the camera to keep rolling. He could feel it too. Something real, something human, something television rarely captured. Mario forced a quick laugh, trying to move the moment along. "Fair point," he said, tapping his cue card nervously. But the control he had at the beginning was gone. Keanu had taken the tension, the mockery, and turned it into grace. And he did it without raising his voice or flexing his ego. As the camera light flickered from one angle to another, Keanu's expression remained steady. He nodded appreciatively at Mario, no resentment in his eyes. "It's all storytelling," he added softly. "Different faces, different moments, but maybe the same heart." The audience erupted into applause this time. Loud, spontaneous, sincere. And in that wave of sound, the energy in the room transformed completely. What began as a setup for ridicule had turned into a masterclass in composure. And somewhere, just behind the control booth, a producer whispered, "We've got something special here." The applause began to fade, and the moment of reverence that had filled the studio slowly dissolved into the low hum of cameras and whispered direction. Mario Lopez shuffled his cue cards, forcing a charming grin, though a faint tension lingered behind his eyes. The show had to go on. Energy, charisma, control. That was his domain. But what unnerved him was the quiet steadiness sitting across from him. Keanu Reeves wasn't playing the game. He wasn't competing for attention. He wasn't reacting the way celebrities were expected to. And in the world of television, silence could be more unsettling than a scandal. Mario's instincts buzzed. He needed to pull the spotlight back. The producer's voice hissed through his earpiece again, almost goading him. Asterisk, push it a bit, Mario. Viewers love unpredictability. Give them something to talk about. Asterisk, the temptation was irresistible. Mario leaned back casually in his chair, pretending to relax, crossing one leg over the other. His fingers tapped lightly on the armrest as he looked at Keanu with that smooth, practiced smirk that usually disarmed even the most guarded guests. The lights glimmered off his watch as he leaned forward again, voice dipping into that mischievous register he used when teasing celebrities. "So, Keanu," he began, stretching the actor's name as if he were savoring the build-up. "You've got this legendary reputation, man. The internet calls you the nicest guy in Hollywood, right?" The crowd chuckled, sensing where this might go. Keanu smiled faintly, eyes gentle. "That's very kind of people to say," he replied modestly. Mario nodded, but there was an unmistakable glint in his eyes. "Yeah, sure, but doesn't it ever get tiring? Like, people expect you to be this saint. Always humble, always polite. Don't you ever just want to drop the act and be, I don't know, real for a change?" The audience's laughter this time was uneasy, half amusement, half disbelief. Some even turned their heads slightly, curious how Keanu would take it. The question had been wrapped in humor, but it was sharp. Too sharp. It wasn't just teasing anymore. It was a jab, a subtle accusation that his kindness wasn't real. The kind of question that could crack even the most media-trained star. Cameras zoomed in again, capturing every flicker of expression. Keanu didn't move for a moment. He simply sat there, the studio light reflecting off his dark eyes. You could almost hear the silence growing, an invisible pressure pressing down on the room. And yet, in that stillness, there was something disarming about him. He didn't frown. He didn't shift uncomfortably. He just breathed. Slowly, calmly. A few seconds passed before he finally spoke, and when he did, his voice carried that quiet strength that silenced everything around him. "You know, Mario," he said softly, "I think being real isn't about how loud you are. It's about how honest you can be when nobody's watching." His tone wasn't defensive. It wasn't clever. It was raw truth. People see what they want to see. Some think kindness is weakness, or maybe even a performance. But being kind when the world expects anger, that's as real as it gets. The words hit the air like a slow wave. Mario blinked, caught off guard. The audience grew absolutely still. Even the cameraman froze for a beat. Unsure whether to cut to commercial or let the silence do its work, Keanu's expression never hardened. He wasn't angry. He wasn't wounded. He was present, completely and fearlessly so. The contrast between Mario's performative charm and Keanu's unguarded sincerity was so stark it was almost cinematic. But Mario wasn't ready to let go. Maybe it was ego, or maybe it was the invisible pressure of live television, but he chuckled nervously and leaned in again, trying to claw back his footing. "Come on, man," he said, gesturing lightly. "You're telling me you never lose your cool? Never want to just snap at someone? Not even a little?" His tone tried to sound playful, but it felt like someone testing the edge of a blade just to see how sharp it really was. Keanu paused again, and for a moment, the air seemed to thicken. Then, with that same almost meditative calm, he said, "I think we all get angry, Mario. I do. I've lost people, been hurt, failed, made mistakes. But I realized a long time ago that anger doesn't change the truth, it only hides it. I'd rather face the truth quietly than fight it loudly." He smiled faintly, and the light caught the silver in his hair, giving him an almost ethereal presence. There was no applause yet, no music cue, just silence and the faint sound of a camera adjusting focus. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel empty, it felt heavy, filled with understanding. The audience didn't need prompting this time. Slowly, applause began to rise, first a few claps, then more, until it became a standing wave. Keanu didn't bask in it. He just nodded politely, hands still in his lap, his calm undisturbed. Mario's posture slumped slightly, a flicker of humility crossing his features. The producer's voice crackled in his earpiece again, this time softer. Asterisk, "Let it breathe, Mario. Don't fight it." Asterisk for once, he obeyed. He sat back and looked at Keanu with a mixture of respect and discomfort. "You really don't say much," he admitted, half smiling, "but when you do, it kind of hits different." Keanu chuckled lightly. "That's because silence says what words can't," he replied. The audience cheered again, louder this time. The camera panned across faces filled with awe. Some people were even teary-eyed, as though they'd witnessed something bigger than a celebrity moment, something deeply human. What Mario had intended as a playful provocation had turned into a live masterclass in humility and emotional intelligence. It wasn't a debate. It wasn't even a confrontation. It was a mirror, one that reflected how the quietest person in the room could have the loudest impact. The tension that once filled the studio melted into a strange sense of peace, like everyone had collectively exhaled after holding their breath too long. As the applause began to fade again, Mario adjusted his mic and managed a genuine smile this time. "Well," he said, "you definitely have a way of flipping the script, my friend." Keanu nodded humbly. "I'm not trying to flip anything," he said. "I just try to keep it human." The audience roared again, and even Mario joined in, clapping as the camera cut to a wide shot. For a moment, time seemed suspended. Under the bright studio lights, two men, one playing the role of the entertainer, the other simply being himself, shared a silent understanding. The contrast between performance and authenticity had never been clearer. And somewhere, in living rooms across the world where this interview would later air, millions would feel that same stillness, that same pause, the kind that makes you reflect not on the question that was asked, but on the answer that lingered long after. The applause settled once again, echoing softly through the studio like fading waves against a distant shore. Mario Lopez glanced at his cue cards, but his mind wasn't on them anymore. Something about the last exchange had unsettled him, not in a bad way, but in a way that forced self-reflection. He had been doing interviews for years, navigating egos, scandals, and rehearsed charm, yet this man sitting quietly across from him seemed to break every rule of television. Keanu wasn't performing. He wasn't selling anything, defending anything, or seeking validation. He was simply there, calm, genuine, unshakably human. And for a reason Mario couldn't yet explain, it made him feel small. The producer's voice buzzed faintly in his earpiece again, but Mario ignored it this time. He decided to go off-script completely, maybe to redeem himself, maybe just to dig deeper into the man everyone thought they knew. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes studying Keanu's face as if searching for some hidden truth. "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" Mario asked suddenly, the tone softer, stripped of all the bravado. loss, tragedy. Most people would have turned bitter after half of what you faced. But you haven't. You still smile, you still give, you still believe. How do you do that, man? How do you stay kind in a world that's anything but? The audience grew quiet. The question wasn't meant to embarrass, it was genuine now, and everyone felt it. Even the camera operators leaned slightly closer, instinctively drawn to the rawness of the moment. Keanu didn't answer right away. He looked down briefly, fingers interlacing loosely on his lap, his eyes distant, almost as if he were seeing something far beyond the studio walls. The silence stretched for several long seconds before he lifted his gaze again. When you lose enough, Keanu began quietly, you start to understand what really matters. His voice carried the weight of memory, the kind of tone that came only from someone who had walked through shadows and found light on the other side. You stopped chasing noise. Fame, money, attention, it all fades. The only thing that stays is how you made people feel when they were near you. He paused, the soft hum of the studio lights filling the air. Kindness isn't about being nice all the time. It's about seeing people when the world doesn't. About showing up, even when no one applauds you for it. Mario swallowed hard. The words struck deeper than he expected. This wasn't a media-trained answer or a rehearsed soundbite. It was truth, delivered so gently it hurt. Keanu continued, eyes still calm but glistening faintly. You asked how I stay kind. The truth is, I'm not trying to be kind. I'm just trying to not let pain make me cruel. There was a long silence after that, so long that it almost felt spiritual. The audience didn't move, didn't whisper, didn't even breathe too loudly. Mario sat back in his chair, eyes softening, his earlier smirk completely gone. That's something, he said finally, his voice quieter now, almost reverent. Not letting pain make you cruel. He repeated the words as if they were a mantra he wanted to remember. Keanu gave a small, humble smile. We all carry something, Mario, he said. The question isn't whether the world hurts us. It's what we choose to do with that hurt. Some people pass it on. Others turn it into understanding. I guess I'm still learning how to do the second one. He let out a small laugh, lightening the heaviness of the air just enough. The audience reacted with a mix of awe and warmth. No roaring applause this time, just soft claps and emotional faces. A few people in the crowd even wiped tears from their eyes. For the first time, Mario didn't try to fill the silence. He didn't deflect with humor or chase the next segment. He just nodded, deeply. You know, he said after a moment, when I was told you were coming on, the producers wanted me to make things fun, maybe catch you off guard. But now I feel like I'm the one who's been caught off guard, in a good way. His voice cracked slightly on the last words, the emotion undeniable. The audience smiled, touched by the rare sincerity from a host known for his glossy confidence. Keanu's expression softened further. That's the beauty of being human, he said gently. We think we're interviewing each other, but sometimes we're just reminding each other of who we really are. A quiet murmur spread through the crowd, people whispering to each other, nodding, their faces reflecting something unspoken. The control room remained silent. Even the producer didn't dare cut to commercial. The moment was too pure to interrupt. It was the kind of unplanned authenticity that no script could ever produce. Mario let out a breath, his usual composure replaced by something humbler, more grounded. You have this way of turning everything into something meaningful, he said softly. Keanu tilted his head slightly, almost amused. Or maybe, he replied, everything's already meaningful, we just forget to notice. The audience erupted into applause again, but this time it wasn't the polite, performative kind that television often demands. It was the applause of people who had just felt something real. Even Mario joined in, shaking his head slightly in disbelief. Man, he said with a half-smile, you could have been a philosopher instead of an actor. Keanu chuckled, that low, unpretentious laugh that somehow made everyone else laugh too. I think acting is philosophy, he said. You step into another life, another pain, another dream, and maybe, if you're lucky, you come back knowing a little more about your own. The applause swelled again, echoing through the studio like a heartbeat. For a brief moment, the usual noise of celebrity culture, ego, image, headlines, fell away completely. What was left was something raw and human, a connection between two people, witnessed by hundreds in the room and millions who would later watch from their screens. When the clapping finally died down, Mario looked at Keanu with a different kind of respect, one born not of fame, but of truth. "I think that's the most honest conversation I've ever had on this stage," he admitted quietly. Keanu smiled, his eyes kind. "Maybe honesty's contagious," he said. The crowd cheered again, the words striking something deep in everyone present. As the camera slowly zoomed out for the transition shot, Mario and Keanu shared a final nod, an unspoken acknowledgement that something powerful had just happened. A simple interview had turned into an awakening. No controversy, no confrontation, just two men meeting at the intersection of vulnerability and understanding. And as the lights dimmed slightly for the commercial break, the audience's faces glowed not just from the studio lights, but from something rarer, something called truth. The silence that followed Keanu's unexpected reply was unlike anything Mario Lopez or the audience had ever experienced on his show. For a heartbeat, it was as if the air itself had turned still, suspended in a fragile tension. The studio lights, usually bright and playful, seemed to dim against the gravity of Keanu's words. The cameras kept rolling, but no one dared to speak. Mario's usual confident grin faltered, the corners of his lips twitching uncertainly as his mind scrambled for the next move. He had thrown a fastball, a jab meant to provoke laughter or at least a nervous chuckle, but Keanu had turned it into a moment of raw, human truth. The crowd's collective breath hung heavy, eyes locked on the actor who now sat so calm, so utterly unshaken, as though the chaos of the world could not reach him. Keanu leaned back slightly in his chair, his gaze steady yet gentle, and his voice, low and resonant, filled the silence. "You know," he began, his tone carrying both warmth and melancholy, "people sometimes mistake humility for weakness. But maybe it's just that some of us have seen enough in life to know that the best moments aren't the loudest." His words drifted through the room like smoke, soft, ephemeral, but impossible to ignore. Even the camera operators, trained to remain stoic during live recording, seemed momentarily entranced. Mario blinked, caught between admiration and discomfort. The audience began to murmur quietly, as though realizing they were witnessing something rare, a celebrity interview turning into an unfiltered reflection of the human condition. Mario finally found his voice, though it came out quieter than usual. That's actually really profound, Keanu," he stammered, glancing toward his cue cards, which suddenly felt useless. He had prepared for another round of fast-paced chatter, perhaps a joke or two about stunts, motorcycles, or fan encounters. Instead, he was facing a man who had turned a light-hearted jab into a lesson about life. Keanu smiled faintly, that same enigmatic expression that always seemed to conceal more than it revealed. "It's not profound," he said simply. "It's just real." The audience erupted, not in laughter, but in applause. A spontaneous, thunderous wave of clapping filled the studio, echoing off the walls. It wasn't for a performance or a punchline, it was for truth. In that moment, the energies shifted entirely. Mario's polished showman facade began to melt away, replaced by something more genuine. He leaned forward, curiosity replacing his earlier bravado. "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" he asked softly, almost forgetting they were live. Keanu nodded once, his expression reflective but peaceful. "We all have," he replied. "Pain doesn't discriminate. Fame doesn't protect you from it. But how you carry it, that's what defines you." His eyes met Mario's, and for a split second, there was no host, no guest, just two men sharing the same truth. The audience fell completely silent again, as if collectively holding their breath. Somewhere, a studio light buzzed faintly, the only sound in the heavy quiet. Mario's posture relaxed. He wasn't just interviewing anymore. He was listening. "You know," he said slowly, "I didn't expect this conversation to go here." Keanu chuckled softly, his tone light but knowing. "Neither did I," he admitted. "But maybe it's where it needed to go." The two men shared a brief, genuine smile, one that dissolved the invisible wall between entertainment and empathy. The studio audience, sensing the change, no longer felt like spectators of a show, they felt like witnesses to a revelation. Even the production crew behind the glass, who had seen hundreds of celebrity interviews, exchanged glances of quiet awe. Something extraordinary had unfolded, something unscripted, unplanned, and undeniably real. By the time the segment ended, the applause was no longer polite, it was heartfelt. Mario rose from his seat and extended his hand, this time not out of obligation, but out of respect. Keanu stood and shook it firmly, giving a nod that spoke more than words ever could. The cameras continued to roll, capturing every second of the unspoken understanding between them. And though the broadcast soon cut to commercial, the audience knew they had witnessed a rare transformation, not just in the tone of the show, but in the heart of the man who hosted it. As Mario walked off stage, he exhaled deeply, the weight of the moment settling in. For the first time in years, he felt humbled and inspired. Keanu, meanwhile, simply smiled to himself as though he'd done nothing at all. But everyone who had been in that studio knew better. They had seen the power of grace, spoken through silence. As the red on-air light flickered off and the studio dimmed into a softer glow, the energy in the room shifted once more, but this time it wasn't tension or uncertainty. It was reverence. Crew members stood frozen in place, some exchanging silent glances, others pretending to check equipment just to delay breaking the spell of what they just witnessed. The audience, still seated, seemed reluctant to leave. It wasn't just another celebrity interview anymore. It had turned into something more, a conversation about life, about dignity, about the quiet strength that often hides beneath humility. Keanu Reeves had walked into the studio as a movie star, but in the span of half an hour, he'd left an impression of something greater, a man grounded by pain, resilience, and grace. Mario Lopez, meanwhile, sat quietly in his chair, looking at his cue cards one last time before setting them down. They felt trivial now, lines and notes meant for a show that had taken on a soul of its own. He glanced over at Keanu, who was standing near the edge of the stage, politely shaking hands with a few crew members who approached him. Mario hesitated for a moment, then stood and walked over, his usual confident stride replaced by something humbler. "Hey," he said quietly, catching Keanu's attention. "I just wanted to say, thank you. I didn't expect that. You really caught me off guard, in a good way." Keanu smiled that familiar, modest smile and nodded. "You asked a real question," he said softly. "Most people don't. You just weren't expecting a real answer." Mario chuckled under his breath, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, I guess I wasn't. You made me rethink how I talk to people on this show." He paused, his tone softening. "I started this gig thinking it was all about keeping the energy up, being funny, being fast, you know. But what you said, it made me realize that sometimes the best moments come from just listening." Keanu placed a reassuring hand on Mario's shoulder. "That's the beauty of it," he said. "You don't have to perform empathy. You just have to feel it." There was something profoundly calming in his tone, an authenticity that could disarm even the most guarded hearts. Mario nodded, feeling the truth of it sink in deeper than he expected. As the last of the studio crew began packing up cables and adjusting lights, a young production assistant, maybe in her early 20s, timidly approached Keanu. She held a small notebook, the edges frayed from use. "Mr. Reeves," she asked, her voice wavering slightly, "I just wanted to say, my mom's a huge fan. She always said your movies helped her through some hard times. She passed away last year, but watching The Matrix was something we used to do together." Her words trembled as she spoke, and for a second, she seemed embarrassed by her own emotion. Keanu didn't hesitate. He reached out gently, taking her hand in his. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said sincerely. "And thank you for sharing that with me. Your mom sounds like she had great taste." That small touch of humor broke the tension, and the girl laughed through her tears. He continued, "You know, stories, whether in movies or life, they stay with us. So in a way, she's still watching with you." The assistant nodded, visibly moved, and walked away clutching her notebook like a keepsake. Mario watched the entire exchange from a few feet away, struck by how naturally Keanu carried himself. There was no trace of arrogance, no awareness of cameras or fame, just a quiet decency that radiated without effort. When Keanu finally turned to leave, the entire studio seemed to watch him go. One of the producers, who had been silent the entire time, muttered under his breath, "That guy's not just an actor, he's something else." And Mario, hearing that, couldn't help but agree. Later that evening, Mario sat in his dressing room long after the rest of the crew had gone home. The city lights of Los Angeles glimmered through the window behind him. He scrolled through clips from the interview, watching the moment Keanu had turned the entire tone of the show on its head. Every pause, every glance, every word carried an authenticity that television rarely captured anymore. He smiled faintly to himself and whispered. He changed the room. Then, almost instinctively, he picked up his phone and typed a message to Keanu's publicist. Tell him, thank you again. That wasn't an interview, it was a masterclass in humanity. Meanwhile, Keanu walked out of the studio quietly, slipping into the cool night air. He didn't use the back exit or a private car service. Instead, he walked alone down the street, hands tucked into his worn leather jacket, blending into the rhythm of the city. The neon lights reflected off the puddles on the sidewalk, and a light breeze rustled the trees overhead. He paused briefly at a crosswalk, looking up at the stars that peeked through the city haze. A faint smile tugged at his lips. For Keanu, moments like that weren't about winning arguments or stealing headlines. They were about connection. About reminding people that kindness and composure could still exist in a world addicted to spectacle. The next morning, clips of the interview went viral. Social media exploded with praise, not for the drama, but for Keanu's words. Headlines read, Keanu Reeves turns awkward interview into a life lesson, and the day Keanu taught Hollywood what grace looks like. Even Mario Lopez shared a heartfelt post. I've done thousands of interviews, but last night reminded me why I started. Thank you, Keanu Reeves, for your wisdom and authenticity. Comments flooded in from people around the world, echoing the same sentiment. Keanu had reminded them that humility wasn't weakness, it was strength in its purest form. In the end, nothing about that night was scripted. No one planned the shift, the silence, or the applause. But that's what made it timeless. When the cameras stopped, what remained wasn't the spectacle. It was the humanity. Keanu Reeves had done what he always did without trying. He made people feel. And long after the lights went out, long after the audience had gone home, the echo of his quiet truth lingered, like a whisper reminding everyone that even in a world obsessed with noise, the most powerful voices are often the softest.